Hi guys, welcome back to That's the Whiskey, your favorite podcast ever.
Yes.
I'm Jasmine.
And I'm Caroline.
And today we have a really, really cool guest.
Yes.
Like really cool. Like you're probably thinking it's really cool, but I'm saying that it's like even cooler than that. So today we have Miss Allie Cates.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good.
I'm so good. I'm really good.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So, just like in general, okay, some of you actually might already know Allie, just because I feel like I know a lot of our listeners are from around Sonoma County, and I noticed when I saw you, I knew other people that followed you. But in general, what would you say that your social media presence is centered around?
Yeah. It's around trauma recovery, nervous system regulation, mental health, like healing, all of the things. But really, the biggest part is around mental health.
Right.
Yeah.
And what brought you there?
Do you want the Reader's Digest version or do you want the long version?
You can give us any version that feels comfortable.
Okay. Yeah. So it really started was at 22, my husband and I lost 3 people in 9.5 months. And it brought up a lot of my old pain that I'd shoved down and saved for a rainy day. There was
every day.
Yeah, right. There was, sexual trauma. I was raped at 15, lost my virginity. There was, just a lot of stuff that I was like, this is too painful to touch, and I had really disassociated from. And I remember I went on a healing quest. Like I was like feeling so out of body. I felt like I wanted to like tear my skin off. I don't know how else to describe it, but I just felt so out of body and uncomfortable. And I remember people being like, try this or do talk therapy, do cognitive behavioral therapy, do EMDR, do hypnotherapy, brain rewiring. So I tried all of these kind of things that people normally say around trauma recovery. And nothing really seemed to move the needle. And I remember I was feeling so low, I was having suicidal ideation, and I was just at my lowest low. And I called a trauma recovery coach in town. I remember I was at this park in downtown Petaluma, and like there's everyone around it. It's like off 5th Street. And I just felt so out of my body. I was like, I need to get out of here. Like I felt like running, but I was like too tired to run. So I was like, we're going to ride a bike. So we're riding our bike. And he called, he's like, tell me a little bit about what's going on. And I said, I feel like all this pain that I shoved down and saved for a rainy day is coming up, and I'm feeling crazy. And he was like, you're not going to believe me, but I've worked with war veterans for 40 years. And I started working with civilians because, this is trauma and this is how it shows up. And you can't out-talk it or out-think it. It shows up in your body and it manifests physically. So then kind of fast forward, I'm with him for really intensely for 3.5 years. And 3 weeks before Ryan and I get married, I get diagnosed with late-stage Lyme and 5 other autoimmune conditions. And I come back from our honeymoon and I sit in an IV room for 9.5 months, get a port put in my chest, try everything under the sun, and almost die of sepsis. So like really intense. And I remember in that IV room, I had to quit my job, sat there, 3 to 4 times a week, 6 to 8 hours a day, sometimes 5 times a week. And I remember just thinking like, this is breaking me down to build me back up into something. And I didn't know at the time what that was. You could not pay me enough fucking money to be in trauma. Yeah. Like at that time, at like 22 to 26, I was like, there's no fucking way. Like I cannot be in this space. Yeah. And, and my coaching business was really built out of that IV room. So then I went back and became a trauma trained recovery coach. And then I'm now getting my practitioner training in somatic experiencing, which is around moving trauma out of the body.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, what the fuck? I was so shook. I'm sorry to just say that I'm so shook, but I just like wasn't expecting all of that.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting the part 2.
Yeah.
So wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate how open you are about the fact that it wasn't just like I went through this hard thing and then there was like this easy linear healing journey.
Yeah.
It all made sense the whole time. When I was at my lowest, I felt like 100% about where I was going.
No.
Yeah.
Because like in my experience, that's not how it works.
No, it never is. And anyone that says that is high or not in their body. Like
literally.
they're not in their body. Yeah.
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 No, I feel like for me, it's almost what we were talking about before we were recording, like the when people share something that's like so, big, and like you're like, do I react? Do I not react? Because I know for me that like when I've talked about like, okay, this happened to me, and people react really strongly, and like, oh, holy shit, like what? I always am like, I'm like, oh, no, it's fine. But then I like go home and I'm like, wait, that was really bad.
Yeah.
Like that thing that happened to me was really bad. And like me and her are so close. Like, and we really, I feel like we really hold each other accountable. Like there's so much that, especially, I mean, I feel like she really holds me accountable. Like she's really real with me. Whereas like, I'm kind of like, I spend a lot of time, like I think in La La Land, and I know because it's more comfortable for me. And there's like I feel like there's an obvious distinction of like two versions of me that I think is clear. One where I'm like, what, and then where I get really like honed in, like right now, and I'm like, okay, but I noticed that she kind of brings me out of La La Land a lot, where when I'm like super stressed or something really big is happening, and I'm like, okay, I can't deal with that right now, so I'm like, I'm fine, guys, everything's good. She's like, are you okay? What's going on for you?
I mean, what you're talking about is like disassociation, right? Which is super healthy and a normal response if you've been through trauma. I remember not being able to go a day without having a feeling like I was having a glaze over my eyes.
Yeah.
Like I could not go a minute without that feeling.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I would get it where I'd like pop in and out of it.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, is everyone just walking around with this glazy feeling?
Right.
And now I rarely ever get it, but like it's a healthy response. And when you learn about trauma, it's like that's what keeps you alive, is disassociating from the pain, because it's too painful.
Yeah. I love the perspective with those kinds of trauma responses of like it's what protected you when you were like really first going through it. Because I know we were talking on a recent episode about shame and how invasive shame can be in trying to heal. And I've really noticed like my own therapist is amazing, because she'll literally be like, this is what kept you alive. It's not serving you anymore. We can work on it and find different things, but like it's not like you were doing something wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's really important. And like shame too is really brought on when you come out of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? So when you're in a trauma response, I'm just going to nerd out on this for you guys, but
I love it.
When you like go into a trauma response, it's a circle, okay? So at the top, you have a trigger. Then you go into fight or flight. Then you have a discharge. Then you go into rest and digest, so parasympathetic. This is where we heal, right? Most of us get triggered, fight or flight, triggered, fight or flight.
Okay, me.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Right? And then you build this emotional charge, okay? And that emotional charge gets stored in your body and it doesn't go away. So if you are visual, if you're watching an animal out in the wild, and let's like say a bunny rabbit's out in the wild, and you see a coyote and it is stalking it, it's going to get triggered, right? The bunny rabbit's going to get triggered. It's going to go into fight or flight. It's going to run away for safety. It's going to have a moment where it finds safety. And then it's going to discharge. It's going to shake. It's going to do all these things to discharge.
Okay, that's my question is I think I'm confused on what the discharge is.
Yeah, I'll get to that. Okay. And then it goes into rest and digest, right? So that's why talking about these things doesn't always help. And that's why, me personally, I knew that all of this pain was showing up in a physical form, in disease, right? And there's so much research and books and everything that like when you have trauma, childhood trauma, developmental trauma, sexual trauma, whatever it is, little t or big T, and it's been in your body for long enough, it's going to manifest in autoimmune disease or cancer. Like it's inevitable. It's going to show up, right? And so I had experienced that. But to your question around the discharge piece of it, do you have a specific question or just what does that look like?
just like what, like I could kind of piece together like everything else, but the discharge.
Yeah.
Is it just like discharging the trauma or like the adrenaline or I guess in general?
In general. So it's like when the bunny rabbit, this is why animals out in the wild don't get traumatized. Like why they don't stay in fight or flight, specifically prey, like the bunny rabbit, right? Is because it discharges all of the hormones that are pumping to keep it running. So it has to discharge it.
And what does that look like?
What
can that look like for humans?
Shaking, throwing up, crying, anger, sadness, a lot of tears, like all of the things.
Like me every day.
I mean, like a lot of things.
For me, I'm a shaker.
Yeah.
Like, super bad. Like I shake really, really bad when I'm angry.
Twitching. I have a client right now who like her eyes twitching and we're working on the eye twitch piece of it because her body's literally looking for a threat, right? So this is why when you have these techniques like EMDR, like it's like, oh, we're going to reprocess your brain. It's like, yeah, but you're still working with your eyes. You're not working with the body.
I did, what's it called? This thing where they put all the sticky things on your head.
Neuroplasticity?
Oh, I remember when you did that.
That was traumatizing, first of all. Okay, it
Oh,
wasn't
DNRS?
it was neurofeedback,
Yeah.
So I used to do readings for years, and which was a lot of, and then I did Reiki for a little bit, and then I like quickly found out that it was just like way too much for me, and that's really what kind of kicked me into like my rock bottom of like, okay, I can't leave my house, that vibe.
Yeah.
And
because it probably flooded your system.
Oh, it did.
Yeah.
Like horribly. And so I was doing like 5 readings a day for like an hour plus time, you know, saying, okay, like, oh my God, you're pregnant, surprise, you know, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, you just lost your mom, like this is horrible, you know. And people I didn't know, all I knew was their first name. And it was, part of it was like really rewarding, right? But then the other part of it was like, it just led to so many questions for me of like, okay, like what is going on? Like what happens after we die? How am I able to know these things? Like what, like I don't understand. And I grew up like with like very like spirituality is like a huge thing in our family, even from the people that I think it at hindsight you would think, oh no, just regular white people, but it's like no, they're all superstitious as fuck, like all believe in like there's more meaning to everything. And anyway, I was having a horrible time, and I had that kind of same moment that you were describing. It made me think of where I was like, I did everything. I saw like 7 psychiatrists. I did talk therapy. I did fucking exposure therapy, which like, and that's the one thing is like, they say for OCD, like the exposure therapy is like the only way, and like PTSD, and like exposure therapy literally traumatized me so bad, like to where I literally couldn't leave my house, and she would have to come over and like drag me out of the house
and be like, no one's here, the tiger's not chasing you. It's okay.
It was literally horrible. Like, and that's what I always tell people. They're like, oh, like, you know, like a lot of people will. I used to talk about OCD a lot on the podcast, and I had like even parents like contact me and be like, hey, like my kid has OCD really bad. Like somebody specifically messaged me and was like, he has been in the shower for 6 hours today and won't get out.
Yeah, but think about it, right? Like why do people have OCD? Why do people are bipolar? It's like at the root of it. Yeah. It's trauma. It's unresolved trauma, right?
Totally.
So if you have OCD and you have this obsessive, really though, if you have this obsessive compulsive to do things over and over again to calm your brain down, it's because your body literally thinks that there is something that is going to kill you.
Yeah. No, literally. Yeah.
So when you think about that, when you are in a space of trauma, when you have been traumatized, your thinking brain, your prefrontal cortex goes offline.
Yeah.
So all of these techniques that we're using right now in trauma recovery are using your prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
when it's like, what's the thing that happens in your body when you feel trauma, when you feel anxiety, when you feel depression? Where do you feel it? In your body first. You don't feel it in your brain.
Yeah.
Like, this is the hill that I will die on, is that talk therapy, like, this is where it misses the mark, or more traditional ways of therapy misses the mark when it comes to trauma. Because I was that. Like, I did all of the things and felt crazy because they weren't working until I found someone that was able to help me get in my body, regulate my nervous system, and actually learn about how trauma is stored in the body and what happens when it sits there. Like, and actually feel into those emotions that never got discharged, right? I could go on a tangent, but like...
No, it's so... everything you're saying is like, I'm like, yes. I'm like, you think like me.
And it reminds me, like, I'm really good at thinking about my emotions. So for years, I was convinced that I was really good at handling them, because I could sit there and think for hours about what I was going through and why I felt a certain way, why the other person probably felt a certain way. And then I started getting really stuck in anxiety, and like I can get frozen and just sit there and think about something for literally hours. And I used to think that I needed to find the right thoughts to think, or I needed to hear the right words, and it would like snap me out of it. And then I realized, like, oh, like, when I take a shower and kind of get myself cozy, and I put on some good smelling like lotion, and I like make sure I've eaten and had water, and I like try to calm my body down, the thoughts calm down. I didn't need to find that specific like winning thought to make it get better. But I think that's what I was searching for so long.
I think a lot of people think the way that you did, which is like, oh, well, I don't need help because I have so many thoughts and they're so anxious, you know? Like and I always tell people, I'm like, if you could heal your trauma by thinking, we would all fucking be healed.
Yeah.
No,
facts.
Like, it's true.
Yeah.
We would all be healed. We wouldn't need to go to anyone.
I feel like for me, I am really like, I feel like I like borderline get irritated by myself, like by my own thoughts. And then I also was raised in like a super, I wouldn't say, because like we grew up on different sides of the family too. So I've noticed something where she's been really helpful in like pointing out like, hey, like that's like, you're being like extremely brutal with yourself. Like, insanely. Like I was not raised to cry at all, like anything, like, and like
and then I was the cousin at all the family parties, constantly
always crying. So we were like the opposite. And like even I would say like lately, like this past like couple years has been so fucked up that like I became such a crier after never crying my whole life. But like I notice that when I am going through moments where I like get super bad anxiety, I'm like the thoughts are racing and racing and racing. It's like it's almost like I feel like because I have a really strong personality, it almost feels like, I don't know how to explain it, like my thoughts are like even like 10 times more like real almost, because it's like even my
your inner critic
brain is like
that's
even
what it's called.
She's like a bitch.
Like, I literally say that my inner critic is like a Friday night football coach in Texas, but a woman. So it's like you can't so it's like you, like anything that you do, it's not good enough and it has to be better, right? And especially if you have developmental trauma, that inner critic is going to be so freaking strong that you cannot differentiate yourself from that thought pattern. And from that, like, and that's where the piece around like getting into your body and the regulation is so huge, because you'll just sit on that cycle of like, I'm the worst. This is what's happening. Oh my God, I'm overthinking this. I'm overthinking that interaction. Did I do this okay? Like, all of the things. Like,
this is such a random question, but
love
I
the random questions.
But
bring them.
Do you know anything about like trauma happening when you're in the womb and like that going on?
Pre and perinatal.
My mom experienced like something horrible when she was, I think, 7 months pregnant with me. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I think I do. Yeah. That was rough.
Not a good neighborhood. But and I notice, and this might have just been me hearing about it as I grew up.
Yeah.
But I notice that I'm super sensitive to that same subject. But I don't feel like it's because it was talked about. But I feel like and maybe I'm just like,
no,
reaching,
you're not.
But
no.
like it happened to her, and I feel like insanely triggered by like the subject.
Have you heard about like epigenetics?
No.
So epigenetics is the study of like what happens when, like, let's say, and I'll take like a maybe less triggering example, but like my grandma was in like the potato famine, or her grandparents were, right? Wow. So like there's going to be a thing around scarcity and mindset, like around money. So then they're going to hoard everything. But like she didn't experience the famine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then that's passed down. So epigenetics is like the change in actual, I believe it's like, you can fact check me on this, but it's like the actual DNA or like chemistry of our genes that changes because of the stress, of the trauma, of the thing. So like you could have, you're like, I'm scared of heights. And then like you go back in your lineage and it's like, well, someone like jumped off. You know what I mean? Like there can be these layers that you're not even conscious of.
That is so cool.
And just learned, like we actually in my training just learned around, it's called pre or perinatal trauma, which can happen when you're in the womb. And it's like the baby, like even though you're in the womb and you're not like conscious of all these things happen, your nervous system is attuned to your mom's nervous system.
Yeah.
So you're picking up on things that like are happening in her body as well.
Yeah. Like because I remember she was telling me that like when it happened, she was like puking all like super bad, and she thought that she was miscarriaging from it, and I lived, bitch. But
like you're here.
I sure lived, but I like was thinking about that, and like I don't know, because even like I don't know, I definitely like want to tell you, like specifically tell you after we record.
Yeah.
Not my story to share.
Yeah.
But it's just so interesting to me because it's not something that like I don't know.
Well, even on another level, like let's say that nothing happened to, like let's give another example. Like let's say something didn't happen in the womb, but your mom, something happened to her like traumatically, but it wasn't when you were in the womb. Like that's epigenetics, right? So then you can have a fear around this thing. And so I feel like a really big part of the healing process is being like distinguishing, like what is mine? And like what am I carrying that's not mine?
Right.
Because
how do you get rid of it?
I mean, you have to do a lot of processing.
Like, how do I stop?
Yeah. I think like the biggest piece is acknowledging like what is yours versus what is your parents. And that takes some time and like, you know, ciphering through and figuring out.
Yeah. Well, I even like noticed things with, like I especially noticed stuff like that with my dad. So my dad grew up in Mexico, and he grew up super poor, like hella poor. And he came here as a teenager by himself.
Wow.
And he does not speak about it. I've never heard any stories about him coming over, which I imagine was horrible. And I've he just isn't the type to talk about it. But I notice, like when I look back on like my childhood, like he super spoiled the shit out of us, like insanely, to the point where like now that I'm like, me and Jonah talk about having kids, I'm like, I don't think I could be that. Like I got literally whatever the fuck I wanted. Like even now, like I could call my dad and be like, hey, I really need this. Can you get it for me? And he'll find a way. Like, and so like stuff like that I noticed, like where obviously he had nothing, and now he gives everything.
Yep. I see that a lot in my parent clients. Where they're like, this is how I was raised, so I'm going to go exactly the opposite. And I'm like, actually, there's like, you're having this opposite reaction because you never dealt with the pain around this. Right. Where they're like, and there's probably the media, exactly.
Yeah.
There's like a middle ground that like, this is probably where you should live.
Because it's probably like, okay, is this your like reaction to trauma you've been through, or is this like a conscious decision you're making, and like it feels really solid and like a calm decision rather than like, this needs to not happen again, oh my god, kind of decision.
And usually most of them will think that it's a reaction. Usually most of them think that it's a conscious, calm reaction until we start doing the body work piece of it, and then they're like, actually it's not. I'm pissed.
That's so interesting.
Everything you're saying, I'm just like, whoa.
It's reminded me of my therapist. Sometimes I'll go into therapy and I'll start like word vomiting for like 10 minutes straight, talking super fast. And then when I finally take a second to take a breath, she's like, where are you feeling this in your body right now? And I'll be like, in my chest. I feel like I can't breathe. But then it really helps because when I started therapy, I thought it was going to be a lot of talking because that's what I'm good at. I can talk about my feelings a lot.
Yeah, but not feel them.
And she was like, let's actually learn how to just feel your feelings and not just think, okay, what thought do I need to have to get rid of it? And it was life-changing.
Yeah.
And not what I expected.
Does she do somatic work?
Yeah.
I think she definitely does.
Yeah. And one thing she's
so cool.
done
I
that-
don't even know her therapist.
I've just
but
talked
I
about her
love
for
her
years.
because I've known her. I've heard her talk about her for years.
Yeah,
and I'm just
I
like,
love that.
Yeah, girl.
One thing that she really did that I did not expect that's interesting is like guided imagery kind of meditation sometimes, which kind of I feel like shut off like the first layer of overthinking and defenses because I kind of got into this like different mind space than usual and like realized what I was feeling kind of behind what I thought I was feeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I love her.
Does she
She's
do
amazing.
actual like hands-on body work too?
No.
Okay.
But I'm also doing it over FaceTime right now.
Yeah.
It used to be in person.
Oh, because she's down in LA.
She, I actually started seeing her up here. And then when I moved, I did FaceTime with her for a little bit. And then I stopped going to her, which was, I shouldn't have done that. I should have stayed going with her, which is a mistake I've made multiple times with like my mental health healing journey, is starting something and then it helps and thinking I'm better and stopping it.
Preach.
Yeah. I started seeing her again this year, but my schedule just did not work for her in-person days.
Gotcha.
So I have to do it on her virtual day.
Oh.
I miss her.
Yeah.
I miss her too. I'm like, I
miss her for you.
I miss you too, girl.
I actually really wanted to ask, basically, like, I was wondering what your expectations for what healing would look like were, like, before you really started what really made the difference for you.
Yeah.
What the expectations were like back then and how healing's been different from that, or maybe some things have been the same.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I started, like, I've been in, counseling for years. Like, I think I started counseling when I was in like first grade or something. So I've been like in the space for a long time. But when I really dove into it when I was in my early 20s, I thought that I was like, okay, this is like a 2-year thing. We're going to get in, we're going to get the fuck out. Like, and like,
me still.
This is the thing too, is like my trauma response is I'm a fighter. So do you guys watch Yellowstone?
I have not. I've heard really good things.
So I'm,
heard that I'm like Beth.
Yeah. So I am Beth Dutton, right? Like, and that was something that I was like proud of because I wasn't able to stand up for myself when I was younger. So like me fighting with my words was my response. I didn't physically fight, but I like verbally could drop you to your knees like in a second. And it's not something I'm proud of, but that was my response, right? So that was my response to everything, is like, I'm going to muscle my way through this. Like, I'm just going to get the fuck through this because I've been through way worse, right? But a lot of the work has been around actually dropping that storyline and actually feeling safety in my body and knowing what that feels like. Like, I don't have to be defensive because I've lived defensive my whole life. So it's been an uncovering and unveiling, and now it's really just about finding safety and like feeling good in my body. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I love that. I know, like, that reminds me, like, I had kind of, I don't know, I grew up as such a people pleaser.
Yeah.
That I thought that was going to be a big part of how I stayed feeling safe when I started therapy and all that jazz. And I thought I could continue to just make everyone happy ever and also make myself happy. And like, that was like a jarring realization for me. It was like, I can't just be a people pleaser and not, like, I can't keep ignoring my own needs and think I'm going to get better still.
Surprise, bitch. I feel like for something that I feel, and I wonder if this is, I mean, I'm sure it's normal, right? But I noticed that I think I kind of hop between different trauma responses.
That's very common.
Where I think I spent a lot of my life being in fight, where like when you described yourself, I was like, yeah, same, like that, like, and like I studied Buddhism, right, which like a lot of it was like I feel like the hardest part for me was like, okay, like when I growing up in an environment where when somebody gets mad, right, it's always physical. Like I grew up hearing that some people just need the shit knocked out of them, and I still believe, like, I really like kind of believe it, and I try not to, but I kind of do.
But it's like innately in you.
Like I just kind of do. Like I don't know how else to like describe it, but like when so that was like, I think literally like people are like, oh, like is being sober like the hardest part of trying to like be Buddhist? And I'm like, no, I've been sober for almost 2 years. Like I don't fucking care. Like, but it's literally like the reaction part for me that's like, I like that I'm just like, I feel like even like in that and even there's even one listener of the podcast who I don't really know her personally, but I know, but from the things she says, I know that she would probably relate to this too, is like that feeling of like how you said, like I could say one thing that could drop you to your knees. Like I feel that way, and it's like I'm not proud of it, but then it's like I feel like I almost like there were points, especially like with our family,
it's a defense
that where I'm like, okay, please don't make me do that. Like please, like really, like, and I like I've said it so many times to people, like, listen, I'm telling you exactly who the fuck I am, so listen. Yeah. Because I don't want to do that. But then it's like, it's just the push and the push and the push.
Well,
and I'm like,
typically when
you're just mad because your dad's a pedophile. You know? Like I can't help it.
Yeah.
Like and it's like, I'm laughing, but it's not actually funny to me. It's just like, okay, what I said was kind of funny. But like, it's really hard for me, like even as I've gotten older, and then I'll go through periods where I'm totally good. I'm fine. I'm like, you know what? I see exactly why you're upset. You're mad because your dad's a pedophile. I see. I couldn't imagine that. I literally could not imagine that. Yeah. And then I can really, you know, do that, but I don't do anything. I don't say shit. I just don't react, and I'm just like,
well, that's interesting because there are different, there are different trauma responses, and they can be coupled together is what it's called. Wow. So like for me,
I did not know that.
Yeah. So for me, like my response actually when I started doing this work, right, is like fights on top, but I really wanted to flight. I really wanted to leave the situation. So you can have couplings where it's like, oh, because I couldn't leave the situation, I learned how to fight with my words. And then if that didn't work, then I fawned the fuck out of people, which is like people please, right? Like fawn or people please. So you can have these different, like, that's like, you know, complex developmental trauma is when you have these multiple layers that are like, you have to pull them out and untangle them. And that piece around like, you know, you're like, okay, some days I'm really pissed off and I'm saying these things to them. And other days I'm like, oh my gosh, I actually have so much empathy for you. It's because you've felt that. And you're like, also like, I can see that this is probably really challenging and hard for you as well. You know, like that's the post-trauma resilience piece of it that we don't talk enough about is like, you do have so much more empathy and compassion for people because you're like, I've been at the lowest low. Like I've seen it and I felt it.
A big thing that I also wanted to ask, but because I know we mentioned a couple mental health disorders, and obviously everybody fucking in the world knows I have OCD. So something that I've been really curious about was like even my therapist, my former therapist, I had one therapist diagnosed me with ADD, right? And which I feel like I have ADD, but I also kind of don't care. I'm more of like, I care more about the symptom person. I even still wish I wasn't diagnosed with OCD because now I notice everything that like is an OCD manifestation, and I feel like I would have been better if I never got diagnosed. Yeah. But then my next therapist undiagnosed me with ADD and said, I think you just have such bad PTSD that you're just checking out. But I was wondering if you have, like, in your work especially, noticed any links specifically between OCD and PTSD.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like from what I see, I'm like, okay, I for the longest time had the OCD theme or obsession of I was afraid of going crazy, right? I was afraid of psychosis. I shouldn't say crazy, but I say crazy because I know that most people are going to identify it as that. But I was super afraid of that. But I know for me that I grew up in a household with somebody with like severe drug-induced schizophrenia. And it was horrible for me. Like, I had to sleep with headphones in every night. I had to lock my door every night. I wasn't even allowed to be home alone with that person.
Well, let's just pause right here.
Yeah.
So you even sharing that piece, which, like, grateful that you did, because I think a lot of people don't want to go into that.
Yeah.
But, like, if you're, right, going back to that cycle, if you think that a tiger is on the other side of the door, and I use a tiger just for like every kind of, because I think people can relate to it. Yeah, exactly. Like, if you think that there's a tiger there and you're like, I'm going to die if I don't lock this door. So I'm going to go back to bed and try to fall asleep. And then I'm going to go and try to make sure the door's locked. And then I'm going to go back and try to fall asleep. And then when I fall asleep and I feel like I'm releasing and actually dropping down into safety, I'm like, wait,
Yeah.
something's there. I'm going to lock the door. So like, this is because you haven't completed the cycle. There's no way for you to discharge because there was an active threat in your home.
Right.
So what gets so misunderstood is that therapists will be like, okay, I'm working with the DSM model, right? They're working with like these models of what these things mean. And it's like, but that actually isn't taking into account, why does this person have these symptomology?
Right.
What's at the root of it? What is the trauma? Why does that happen?
Yeah.
And like, how is it manifesting and showing up? Instead, they're like, here you go, you're ADD. Do you know how many people are getting diagnosed with ADD right now? Let's just pause a second, because we just went through a pandemic. Everyone had to actually sit with their feelings, and it stressed them the fuck out, and it threw them off.
Facts.
And like, if they did have any trauma in their childhood, it's gonna come up. Like, what? Like, listen. Do you listen?
Oh, it did.
Yeah, but like, listen to like Gabor Mate, who's I think he's a medical doctor, and he writes about the symptom, like the link between what you're talking about, ADD, OCD, bipolar, manic, like all of these things, and trauma. Like, there's so much research out there about it, but people are like, oh, it's just this thing that you have, you know, and then it mind fucks you because now you're hyper aware. And like, that is just so disempowering to me. And it's like, you can move past the thing that you were diagnosed with, like, hands down, hard stop. Like, you can totally do it. And also, it's okay if you can't.
I'm like,
you know, like,
I know the pandemic was hella hard for me. Like, I lived, and that was totally when my OCD manifested. Like, I literally chemically burned my hands with bleach. I literally could not leave the house, like, at all. That was when I first started having panic attacks.
I remember
good old panic attacks.
You would text me all the time, like almost every day, if not every day, like really not in a good space.
Yeah, no,
and
it was
like
horrifying.
Stuck in your OCD. And then I would go on the Press Democrat and see what the statistics were for like COVID and stuff.
And also
and
not
like,
allowed
send
to
it
Google.
to you because and that was like the only way I could really bring you down, was like trying to find some like statistic or like fact that could calm you down, but it seemed really miserable.
It was miserable. And I think because I lived alone too, and I also, like, I worked at that one coffee shop forever, and then it just was a big thing happened, and then I left super abruptly, and then the pandemic happened right after, and then I got diagnosed with OCD, and it was just like super.
Do you follow the holistic psychologist?
I might.
So she just posted this thing, and she was great. She was like, you know, when I was in my, like, when she was a practicing psychologist, she'd have to like diagnose people with things, right? And she was like, no shit. Like, why am I diagnosing people with things? Because they're like running around trying to make ends meet. They're trying to like live in society. There's all this pressure and all these things. And it's like, we actually don't look at the person and like what's at the root of what's happening and how it's showing up.
No, my last therapist, she was really, really good about like acknowledging my past. Like I remember like it was like a year ago, she straight up said, if I saw your case, like I would literally think you were like in jail or like a drug addict. Like I would not have any idea that you are who you are. Like I'm shocked that you are who you are. And she was like, I'm not saying that to make it feel more dramatic, but to like show you that like it's not all in your head. Because I think for me too, it's like, I think something like, even just from the podcast, people reach out to me a lot for like, oh, like I'm having this traumatic thing happen or like stuff like that. And the hill that I always will die on is like, you have to be around people who acknowledge what happened. That's like, at least for me, that's like always been like my first step, because I grew up even now dealing with like the wasn't that bad, like okay, like it could have been worse, and then in turn I do that to myself.
I know I dealt with that a lot when I was growing up too. And then
it's just in our family thing.
Yeah, it's interesting now. I was just talking to my mom earlier. She's telling me a story about like a health thing that happened, and there was a miscommunication. She didn't realize she was supposed to wait like 5 weeks to not go back to work after something happened, and she went back to work like the next week, and she felt like shit and just thought that she was like needed to power through it. And then 5 weeks later went to the doctor, and he was like, oh, like you're probably ready to go back to work now if you feel up to it. And she said she literally wanted to cry, and he was horrified that she'd gone back to work. And I was like horrified for her. That sounds horrible. But I was also honestly thinking like, damn, I kind of do the same thing a lot of thinking like, I just need to push through this. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
Well, it's generational, right? It's like, I mean, it is this mindset of like, hurry up and pick your bootstraps up. And like my mom's side of the family was, military. So it's like everything. Yeah. Like everything.
Okay,
no, work through a lot. But like, everything is like, if it hurts, like that's the Friday night football coach in my head, right? Is like, if it hurts, you keep on pushing through.
Yeah.
I could tell you stories after stories about the things that were dismissed, but it's like, that's like up to us to go, okay, well, I want to heal this piece of me and change this for if you do want kids in the future, that you're not passing that lineage to them. Right? And go like, I'm actually really conscious, and not to say we're not going to fuck up, right? Like we all are as parents, but like, but just to notice that and go, okay, well, I have the power to change this, which seems like a daunting thing, but it can be really empowering.
One thing I also want to say is like, I think for the cool thing about like being best friends and cousins is like, I'm like, when she's like, yeah, my family does this thing, and I'm like, oh my god, we have the same family, so my family does that too. I'm like, oh my god, like, or even what was it, the last episode that we were talking about how nobody in her family accepts compliments. Like I'll literally be like, oh my god, grandma, you're the prettiest woman on earth. I'm obsessed with my grandma. She's just so cool. And she'll be like, oh, you're a good liar. Like she's just like, oh, stop it, like stop. And like, but then I can be like that too sometimes, or I'm like, yeah, say it again. Like it's
like, tell me more,
but
I
can never be like, oh my god, thank you.
Yeah.
Like unless it's like with somebody I'm super uncomfortable with, I'm like, oh yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, but one of the things that I wanted to ask was, for everybody who is at the point where like, okay, I can accept my trauma and blah blah blah, but like how, because I found myself at this point where I was so stuck in fight or flight that it started to affect my health, where I've also struggled with disordered eating like my whole life, and
which is that discharge,
right? That'll do it.
So like if we don't get that discharge, we're going to show up with some type of disordered eating, whether that's restricting or binging or purging, because we're trying to superficially manifest the discharge,
but it just doesn't
actually happen, right? But just to acknowledge that, like that is very normal.
Okay, see, that makes sense. But so like even I was so stressed out that I literally had to start taking like these fucking pills for my my blood pressure was heightened, like skyrocketed, because I was so stressed out when I lived in Santa Rosa. Like and my doctor was like, something
that was
ain't
quite
right.
the time.
And she was like, I don't know if like you've just like at that time I like was barely eating, and she was like, I don't know if you're just like not eating enough to where like your blood pressure is just like heightening because you have no good or bad cholesterol or like what it is. But after that was kind of like a wake up call, because I was like, damn, I gotta take these pills every day. But I also like I went through a period of time where I was just like, how do I take myself out of fight or flight? Like, how do I get out of this? And like I feel like there, at least at that time, there wasn't any information of like how to do it, whether it's like a physical act that you do with your body or what, like anything. All I can ever come up with is the 5 senses thing. That's the only thing that anybody ever can tell me. And I just want to know, like, how is there anything that you can do, any place to start taking yourself out of fight or flight, and like lowering the cortisol or adrenaline or whatever the hell it is that's making me all like
jacked up.
And I would love to hear like kind of like things someone could do in the moment, as well as like what are like long-term changes that you've seen to be effective.
I would say the first long-term thing is like working with the practitioner that'll actually help you get in your body and move the emotional charge through your body. So while talk therapy is great, and like I'm not shitting on it, like even though it sounds like I am,
I will.
But like even though it is really great, and even if they're guiding you through like getting in your body, like actually working with the practitioner that is like specifies in that is huge, because that's just like number one, I will say. Talk therapy is really good for like the first couple of years to acknowledge like this is actually what happened, this is what you went through, and like really to validate what's happened, especially if there's no one in your life that will do that for you, right? You guys are like a blessing for each other because you have that, which is really great. And then the second thing I will say, like in the moment, is actually like scanning the room. So when you're in fight or flight, you're here. You're only looking here because you
tunnel vision.
Yeah, you literally can't see outside of you, because if a tiger is chasing you, you're like, I got to get the fuck over there, right? As fast as I can. So even just like looking around, and it can be close and it can be wide, which I'm not going to nerd out on this. But like look, like you have to turn your head as you're doing it. So literally you can be like driving. I mean, I wouldn't practice driving actually. I take that back because I don't want people to get in a car accident. But
I
like,
actually tried to do this like exactly what you're talking about while driving the other day when I was anxious, and then I was like, wait, I can't do it.
Yeah. But even just like, okay, so the scanning piece is huge because
can you scream?
Yeah.
I know that sounds super weird, but I just like was thinking like, what if like, because if you're trying to like get the energy out, could you just like literally scream, or would that make it worse?
No, I mean you can totally do that. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people. Yeah.
We're to walk in, and you guys are just gonna hear me screaming.
I mean, like that would be like. I mean, that's what comes up when people are working with me. It's like they're screaming, they're punching the pillow, they're throwing up, they're having like a very big visceral reaction. They're shaking. They're like having.
Okay, wait. I think I'm a little confused on what you do.
Yeah.
Wait. So what is that? What happens during a session that makes that reaction happen?
They're discharging.
Like, are you literally touching people, or
I'm either doing somatic experiencing, which is
that?
So somatic experience. This is hard to describe.
I should have asked this. Like,
somatic experiencing is like completing the cycle. So Peter Levine wrote this book around how animals out in the wild do not stay in fight or flight, and he said because they complete this cycle. So we're either doing hands-on work, or we're doing like helping them get into their body, and it's creating this discharge of like they're shaking or they're having some type of release, right?
Interesting.
So it's a combination of that. You're doing like myofascial work, you're doing some body work around it, but it's dependent on like what the client needs. A lot of clients that have, develop like complex developmental trauma, there's like not a lot of touching because that's not safe, right? So like you're creating safety for that person, right? So I would say back to your question though, like in the moment, doing some scanning, or even just finding a spot on your body. And this is way more challenging than you think it is. Like finding a spot on your body, like where do you feel this in your body? So if you're like, I feel anxiety, like where do you feel it? In your chest or your stomach? Comment. Okay. What does it feel like? It feels like pins and needles.
Interesting.
Okay. Is there a place on your body that feels the opposite or neutral?
Oh. See, I never get past that last question.
Yeah, so then
I'm
it's
like, oh shit, I feel like shit. And then I'm like, okay, good
so
job, Jasmine, you did the work.
like if I worked with you, I would like do a lot of stabilization for you. so that you actually can
This
land.
bitch needs some stability.
No, don't. Yeah. Don't therapize over there. Yeah. Don't do that. Don't do that to yourself.
No, I totally. I mean, I appreciate any feedback. I think I've struggled so much in therapy because I literally had a therapist at Kaiser. So if Kaiser wants to sue me, go ahead. But
Kaiser's
I had
the
it there.
worst. I'm about to switch to Kaiser
for mental health.
for my life right now.
Kaiser sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
and
my
physical.
opinion. And I was like 17, so I was just about to turn 18, and they're like, the psychiatrist told my mom, without medication, and she said it in front of me too, which first of all is fucking rude, but she said, without therapy, your daughter will never live, or without medication, excuse me, your daughter will never live a normal life. Like, she's too depressed, she doesn't want to go to school, she doesn't want to do this. And
did she ask you about your trauma?
no, like,
Wait, hard stop though.
yeah, it's so stupid.
But this is
right?
like this is like, I'm gonna go out on a limb here. This is probably a hot topic, but like a hot take. But like, when you talk to medical doctors, and I knew this because I've talked to medical doctors. I'm like, how long did you spend researching diseases? And they're like, oh, like a couple months. All diseases, couple months. So when I'm like talking about Lyme and all these other diseases that I was diagnosed with, I'm like, so you're just going to categorize all this shit in 3 to 4 months, right? Mm-hmm. I've talked to many psychotherapists, MFTs, et cetera. And I'm like, how long do you take talking about trauma? And they're like, not a lot unless you're specialized in it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And I
have you ever had a doctor Google what you're talking about while you're sitting in there?
Yeah.
That's happened to me recently.
That happened to
like,
me the other day.
Cool.
Yeah.
It was with a medication I was prescribed, and then I had horrible side effects that he didn't tell me about because he was just Googling. And then when I Googled it, I was like, oh, it's really common. And this is like, but it's so unsettling too.
No.
It's like, like, doctors are very smart. They do a lot of good stuff. I've met great doctors.
Yeah, and we need them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are experiences like that where I'm like, what's going on? Do either of us know what's happening right now? Like,
I personally have yet to meet a great doctor. Okay, I'm sorry. Is your girlfriend gone? Sorry. Where'd she go? Sorry. She's the only good doctor I know. She's a doctor. His girlfriend.
Yeah.
But... So she said that, and then they sent me into a psychologist, and she was like, she literally at 17 years old said straight up, I'm so sorry, but you are way too smart for a 17-year-old, and I literally don't know how I can help you. Like, you are talking about everything so well, like, you are doing this and that, and like, I can't help you. You're gonna need to find somebody else. Which, first of all, I kind of respected, because I was like, okay, slay. But then it just like, and that's kind of, I never got like told like you need to stop seeing me, but I got told that same thing multiple times from so many different therapists my whole life.
That happened to me. They were like, they'd be like, you're scrappy, you're getting it, you understand it. So then you feel shame because you're like, why don't I feel good?
No, I guess I'm like, okay, like, yeah, I'm so fucking wise for my age. Like, yeah, like, look what's happened. Like, of course I would
you had to grow up at an early age.
Like, duh.
Yeah.
But like, that was something that I ran into so much was like, and even now that like me and my therapists are no longer working together because I had a schedule change, and like even now like when I think about I'm gonna get a different therapist, I'm like, because I mean for somebody like me, like I would love to be at a place where like I could just be like no more therapy, but like I'm just now getting to the like I think I just like pussyfooted around in therapy for so long that like now I'm like, oh shit, like I really gotta kind of talk about that. But
you know what I will say about that is I feel like my 20s, I thought I was doing a fuck ton of work on my mental health that no one else was doing. Like, it wasn't a hot topic. We didn't have TikTok.
Yeah.
Right. And so like I definitely was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing it. So by the time I hit 30, I'm going to be like so much more regulated and into it. And like which is true. Like, there's definitely more regulation in my nervous system that I could never do the work that I do if I didn't have more capacity. But like, I really think that your 30s is like when you get into like the real fucking shit, because your 20s is like about stability.
Right.
If you grew up in a toxic
get out
home, Like you're just trying to figure out what's happening.
Yeah. No, that's I've heard talk to you about that in a recent episode of like, because I moved out at 17, and then I was like scrambling to find a place because nobody fucking rents to 17-year-olds. It's illegal.
Yeah.
And I got my first apartment. Like I lived with somebody for a bit, and then I got my first apartment on my 18th birthday, and I literally feel like the first couple years of living alone was like just being like, what the fuck just happened? Like just being like, all
you're
right,
shocked.
Like, and then it was like I would go through periods where I was like, we had a joke on one episode that I had a pet fly because I was so I grew up in such a loud, like crazy household, you know, that like when I was alone, it like scared me.
Yeah.
Like I was like, what the fuck? And I had these neighbors that would fight hella bad.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I was like, it made me feel so
Safe.
comfortable.
Yeah.
And my friends would be like, dude, like I would be calling the apartment manager on those people every day. Like they weren't like violent with each other, but like they were just annoying.
But you were like, this feels calming.
But but I like the
like,
quiet would like freak me out. Like, home sweet home, guys.
Yeah.
Beat his ass, girl. Like, I'm just kidding. But like I feel like for me it was like that 2 years of like being like, okay, I'm here. And then after that, I was like, oh my God, okay, so like maybe it wasn't normal to like, I started sleeping without headphones in, like stuff like that. Now I could never sleep with headphones in now. Like,
well, yeah, it's interesting because like as you work through it, you're like, as you work through it, like things start to shift, your meaning, your behavior, like as you actually start to uncover and like delve into the nervous system, all these things, your senses, like all of that will start to shift.
Yeah. Well, I even had like a school counselor who I did super poorly in high school. I barely went to school. And it was really a healing moment actually of like me and a friend had went back to visit another teacher and I ran into him. And he was like, come to my office, like let's talk. And I was like, first of all, you suck. No, not really. But I was just like, you know, he was like, did you ever go to college? Like, did this? Because we both ended up testing out together. She had like horrible chronic illness and then among mental health issues. And then I just couldn't, I was like, not the vibe for me. And he was like, well, like, why didn't you like ever, like, what was it? Like, why couldn't I like reach you? And I was like, okay, first of all, I was being molested by like everyone. Like, first of all, like I was like in the middle of that, you know, like it's so like when you're in high school and you have this like fucking old family member texting you all the time, where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? Like this and that. And then trying to hide it from your friends and your high school boyfriend and like trying to do that. And then like, and then I was like, I had way bigger fish to fry than like what the fucking math homework was. Like I even now
you're trying to live.
I don't.
You're trying to survive.
A fuck with it. Like I don't like. It wasn't about like not trying or like not
that you didn't reach me.
Yeah, it was like I literally could not focus on other things. Like I was trying to survive, and like even now I think about like everything I say on the podcast, and like as much as I think people think that I'm just like a real straight up person, like every time I say anything about like my home or anything like that, I can already see the text messages coming in. Was it really that bad? Like, was it, people know who your family is. Like, like I can, and it's just like, but I feel like that like further traumatizes me. Like it like further like instills it. And so like, I had to get to a point where like, I was just like, you know what, fuck everyone. I'm going to talk about what happened because I literally like, I want to be a good woman one day. Not that I don't think I'm a good woman, but like I want to be a mother. Like I want to do things that I don't see myself doing in the best way if I don't fucking get through this. Yeah. And it's going to take a long time, but school for me was just like hell. like hell. It like I wanted to like throw up and die, and I'm not even exaggerating.
No, I get that. I used to
like,
text
horrible.
my parents when I would go to school, and I was dealing with like constant chronic migraine, but like a constant migraine when it was at its worst, and the early stages of fibromyalgia, and a bunch of mental illness that I feel like I didn't even know where to begin with it, but also I was trying to like hide my mental illness because people didn't believe me about my physical illness, and I thought if they found out about the mental illness, they would just believe me less.
Yeah.
And I would like text my parents at school like, I can't do this, please come pick me up, and they'd be like, you'll be fine, just push through it. But I literally felt like I was dying when I was there.
Yeah. That's the thing too. I see, you know, people ask like about like my own like physical healing journey, and they're like, what do you think's the thing that shift? And for me, it was like that I was taking my power back, right? Because a lot of times when you have physical manifestations, it's like, it's trauma at the root of it that manifests because you're pumping out so many fucking cortisol and stress hormones and all the stuff. And then people don't see it because it's like, unless you are diagnosed with, you know, cancer or you're getting infusions, like people aren't seeing that. Even when I was getting infusions, people were like, you don't look sick. And I'm like, that I'm like, I get that that's like trying to be supportive, you know, but like, I also think that that's like a really good example of mental health and like trauma is like people that have trauma, I always describe it like a wound, right? Like if you have this gaping wound and you've for years bandaged it up and you finally and no one sees it, but someone accidentally bumps into it and you're triggered. And you're like, oh. But then you open it up and it's like still hemorrhaging and it's been 10, 15 years, like that doesn't take away from the fact that you have a gaping wound. Yeah. And people are always like, well, you have to look a certain way. You have to have a diagnosis. You have to act a certain way. And it's like, you don't.
I actually, you know? we have a therapist in our family who actually told my mom has Graves' disease, and she had like a horribly traumatic life in childhood. And she always told me growing up, like, deal with your trauma because then you're gonna have a disease like me. Like, she would, you know, and my mom was like on the like the autoimmune is due to trauma wave, like back in the day. She was like, well, she probably was like, she was reading all these books. Like I remember growing up, she had all these books and like all this shit, and like she was really cool. And but I remember a therapist in our family literally told my mom, if you want your doctor to believe you, you need to go in there looking like shit. Because my mom always, like, she always has her makeup done, her hair done. She's a hairdresser. She's always dressed up. And she literally told my mom, it was our aunt, and or I guess your cousin. Or no, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know.
You're like neither here nor there. Yeah.
Technically, she's my mom's cousin, but then I'm older than her. So it's like super confusing.
Oh, yeah.
But anywho. And she was like, yeah, you need to go in there dressed like shit. But in terms of like the physical stuff, like I've always, and we can cut this out if this is too much, but I've always wondered for you specifically because I remember being a kid and being worried about her because she was so like emotional and like clearly something was like wrong. Yeah. Like clearly, and I remember she always had stomach issues and like it just like I remember literally like thinking as a kid like something like is not right here, like somebody's like missing something because she was so like distressed all the time. Like
it's called like, a global high. Yeah. Global high activation is what it is. Is when your nervous system is operating at a global high activation.
Can you be born like that? I'm asking because
you can.
I wouldn't be surprised if my mom was really stressed out when she was pregnant with me, and I was born with these severe digestive issues that basically through doctors being stupid didn't really get looked at. Like it should have gotten looked at when I was literally a newborn in the hospital, but didn't get looked at until I was 16, and they were convinced I had like this like birth defect and would need surgery and all this stuff, and it ended up being that nothing seemed to be wrong. And
I mean they're doing research right now, just even like, and I'll go at like the most basic level around like IBS, right, which isn't basic, but they're doing research right now that it's actually like a nervous system dysregulation.
That's what I think.
And it's actually less of like a you have a stomach problem and it's a nervous system issue.
I've literally noticed my stomach gets I guess an easy way to put it is my stomach gets really upset when I go through really bad stuff. When I went through my last breakup, when I went through the other really bad thing that happened to me this year, literally my stomach was insane. both times. And I've actually started noticing when I'm going through like a stressful period of time, if my stomach's getting upset more easily, I've started tuning into the fact that like, why is my stomach upset? I have been kind of stressed lately, and then I can start managing the stress, and it tends to get a little bit better.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time to figure that out.
Well, and even like, I mean, it's so wild what doctors miss, but like if you're coming out of the womb with stuff, like, yeah.
First of all, wow. We're definitely gonna need to wrap this up, but this episode was so I think different than I expected it to be. Not like for better or for worse, but I just like it. I feel like I thought that I was gonna come into it. Sorry if I'm so far away, but I thought I was gonna come into it with like a really like interview style, like have questions for the viewers, which I definitely like. I think that's the big thing about That's the Whiskey is we mostly talk about trauma, and we kind of share our own stories, and people just end up relating. Like it's never with the intention of like, do you relate to this? But I think I didn't realize that this episode would be so much like that, because I have so many questions for myself. I'm like, wait, what the fuck? Like, I'm like, wait a minute. But I'm so I think surprised by how, I guess not surprised, but I'm happy how calming your energy is, like just to be around.
Thanks.
Which is really interesting. I think your little traumatized body. I'm like, because people say that to me, they're like, oh my God, you're so calm, or like you talk so slow, and like you talk so quietly, and like, but I'm literally like, I am like mentally, I'm like the loudest person in the room. Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I've just...
It's that Friday night football coach in your head.
Yeah. She's like, bitch, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I've loved this so far. I love like the conversation, and I love the information you've given. And
the actual information coming out of your mouth. Yeah. Not like the just like repeating back what we said to you.
Yeah. And I mean, guys. I would love if like to kind of wrap things up, if you wanted to give like a little blurb about the work you do more in depth. I wish I had asked earlier, but like what kind of work you can offer to people?
Yeah, well, first, thank you guys so much for having me on. I know like it's really beautiful to see when people are able to like talk about things, because you know, I like have a neon sign in my office that says it's okay to not be okay. And I think it's so important that the more that we can share our stories, people will be able to relate. And like maybe it's the first time they're ever hearing about something that's like a taboo topic be talked about, right? So I appreciate what you guys are doing for having me on. I am a trauma recovery coach and somatic experience practitioner in training. So essentially what I do is help people move the emotional charge, that discharge that never took place at that actual moment of trauma, help them move it through their nervous system so that they can create safety and empowerment in their bodies.
Awesome. Yeah. I love that.
And not like, I don't want this question to come up as like, give me a free therapy session, but like, okay, say if somebody like me and somebody like her was coming to you, just to like kind of give the viewers an idea of how you approach things so differently. Yeah. What would be the differences in how you approached like helping us individually? Yeah.
I think I have a little bit more of a read on you than I do you right now, because I think you've shared a little bit.
You're all mysterious.
It's my Scorpio, right?
That's so funny.
But I would say, you know, actually, that's a lie. I think for you, because, you know, you have more of the chronic pain that's online, there's a lot of like activation in your nervous system, right? So I would have very similar approaches for you guys for the first couple of sessions of doing more somatic experiencing work, which is just helping you complete those little cycles. I don't think I would do hands-on body work with either of you until we're in a little bit deeper, just because of what I'm picking up on. But it is really case by case, because I'll be like, okay, this is what I think we're gonna do, and then I'll get in there and be like, and then I'll change to like what the client needs. So if they're like, I need more of this, or I need less of this, and you know, it's a collaborative approach. It's not just me being like, this is what we're gonna do to like regulate your nervous system.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the healing part of it, right? Is when you have someone like actually walks alongside of you and goes, oh, I'm noticing this. Are you noticing this? And they're like, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm noticing this in your body.
I
Like,
feel like validation is so important. Like,
Yeah.
that's something that I've just in like the last like week have like an active thought to myself is like, oh my God. Just having somebody to be like, oh my God, that was like really fucked up.
yeah.
Makes me like, I think for a long time it stressed me out more when people did that. Like I was talking about in the beginning, like when I was like, oh shit, something really bad happened. But like now, like the more comfortable I've gotten with the past, like the more I'm like, I just need somebody to say, oh shit, like that happened.
And
you
that's
know?
like why I think talk therapy is so validating, is just for that. Like, and not just for that, but a big reason is is being like, yeah, it was really fucking hard.
Yeah.
And you're here and you're alive.
Yeah. And how could anybody maybe watching this or listening to this reach you? Like, what would be their first steps?
Yeah, I would say I'm most active on Instagram, so you can reach out to me there. There's like a link that you can fill out an application to work one-on-one, and then my assistant will reach out to you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Slay. I'm gonna just be screaming all the way up. I'm gonna be like,
Do it.
we can
Text me afterwards and see how it goes.
Hey girl.
Yeah.
I crushed my vocal cords. I don't have a voice anymore.
Aw.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me.
Actually, if you're not new here, you know that this is the first time that we've interviewed somebody together.
Yeah.
Oh.
So let us know how you liked it, because we've been doing That's Whiskey for a few years now.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. Wow. And we have never done that.
I love that. Yay.
Thank you for being
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful guest.
All right. You heard it here first. That's the fucking whiskey. Bitch. Bye.
Bye.
So good.